Boston, October 2nd, 1987. The clock had just ticked past midnight, but in the polished stillness of the Back Bay district, where the brownstone facades wore ivy like jewelry and the sidewalks echoed only the occasional heel, something sinister had begun to stir. Meredith Falcone's apartment was anything but quiet. A family argument had curdled into something meaner, darker. Her cousin, a man she once trusted, had turned volatile. His words weren't just loud, they were edged with menace. Meredith, hands trembling but voice defiant, hurled the ultimatum. Get out! Now! But in her gut, she knew he wasn't walking away without a show of force. Cornered and scared, she reached for the lifeline all city dwellers count on in moments like these, the emergency line. Her fingers danced across the rotary, dialing 911, her voice thick with fear. If you don't leave, she warned him, I'm calling the law. Dispatch picked up, calm, efficient, but alert, trained to hear the panic between the pauses. Within moments, 2 patrol cruisers rolled out, red and blue lights refracted in the glossy, wet streets. Officers George Torres and Chris Rogers were first to respond, the kind of beat cops who'd seen their share of Friday night chaos, but still wore the badge with quiet integrity. To them it sounded routine, another domestic dispute in an upscale neighborhood. But the city has a way of wrapping danger in silk and velvet. Boston Police, Torres said into the building's intercom. His tone was practiced, patient. Can you let us in? Inside, Meredith was battling more than just technology. The buzzer's dead, she murmured through the speaker. Maybe the neighbors can open up? Outside, rain hung in the air like static. The officers waited, listening. There was movement inside, muffled sounds. Too much tension for a simple argument. Minutes later, a second patrol duo arrived, Officers William Kennedy and Roy Surge. Standard backup, just in case. They split the approach, 2 officers at the front, 2 circling around to the back alley, behind the building where shadows like to linger. That's when Torres saw him. A figure crouched behind a ledge, half hidden, half poised to run. Asian male, lean frame, late 30s, dressed to disappear. Torres tightened his jaw. Hey, step out here, he called, voice steady, hand drifting toward his holster. The man didn't move. A locked gate kept them separated, but not safe. Torres issued a command. Climb the fence, come to me. The man obeyed, almost too smoothly. As soon as his boots hit the ground, he bolted. No hesitation, no fear, just raw escape. Torres lunged. Instinct over training. A scuffle, muscle against muscle, and then a flash of metal. The report of a handgun split the silence. Torres staggered, blood already blooming through his uniform. Seconds later, Rogers watched in horror as the stranger pivoted, weapon raised again. Another shot. Then back to Torres, a third round sent flying. Kennedy and Surge burst into the backyard just in time to witness the carnage. Another shot cracked through the night air. Roy Surge dropped. Kennedy fired back, but the suspect vanished into the dark streets like smoke in a storm. Gone. I felt the blood before I saw it, Torres would later recall. My chest, my arm, 3 hits, 1 to the lung. I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't let Roy die there alone. Backups screamed in through the night. 2 officers down! Repeat, we've got 2 officers down! Rogers' voice crackled through the radio like a flare into the sky. Within minutes, Back Bay, that refined corner of Boston, was overrun with sirens and flashing red vengeance. At the ER, both Torres and Surge were barely holding on. Medics worked like sculptors with seconds for clay. But even as surgeons fought for lives, another battle was brewing outside. A race to find the phantom shooter before he could vanish forever. And that's where the FBI stepped in. They didn't knock, they arrived. Not in bluster, but in precision. Analysts, profilers, field agents from the Bureau's Boston office, all moving like parts of a machine built for one thing, capture. They knew this wasn't just an assault. This was a declaration. A cop killer on the loose was a national priority, and the Bureau's presence meant this case had just become federal. While Boston detectives canvassed witnesses and scoured crime scenes, the FBI began assembling a behavioral profile, digging through old cases, searching for patterns. They knew what local law couldn't always see. Ghosts like this didn't appear without leaving behind whispers somewhere else. One thing was already clear. This wasn't the cousin Meredith had called about. This was something else entirely. And the hunt was only just beginning. The morning after the bloodshed, Boston awoke under a heavy sky. The rain had stopped, but the air still hung thick with dread. Inside police headquarters, the mood was colder than the morgue. One officer dead, another clinging to life. A suspect gone, like a phantom swallowed by the city's underbelly. At the center of it all stood Sergeant Detective James Fong, the man now tasked with unraveling this urban nightmare. Fong wasn't new to death. He'd walked more crime scenes than weddings, memorized the anatomy of violence, and learned early that justice never arrived gift-wrapped. It had to be carved out, one splinter at a time. But this case wasn't ordinary. This one carried a bad-shaped hole in its heart. The shooter didn't just resist, Fong muttered to his team. He executed. That changes everything. He started at the scene. Always the scene, not just the backyard where the ambush unfolded, but the vantage points, the pathways, the exits no one else noticed. That's when he saw it. A hulking air conditioning unit pressed up against the wall beneath a third-floor hallway window. Dust-streaked, scuffed, footprints, and not just any prints. Descending, not ascending. He didn't come in from the street, Fong murmured. He came from inside the building. That revelation reshaped the map. The shooter wasn't a trespasser. He was a ghost tenant, maybe a guest, maybe something worse. The building was no longer just a location. It was a suspect itself. The residents were interviewed one by one, with care, then pressure. The focus? Asian males, matching the shooter's description. They scoured the registry, asked about visitors, out-of-place guests, odd hours. But the answers came back hollow. No names, no details. No one recognized the composite sketch created from the shaken memories of surviving officers. A stone wall of silence. Some tenants claimed they'd heard the gunshots. Others hadn't even known a shooting occurred. Most didn't know their neighbors. A few barely remembered their own address. The building had become a hive of anonymity, a perfect place for a predator to hide in plain sight. Meanwhile, in the ICU, George Torres clung to consciousness. Tubes in his lungs, monitors blinking rhythm like a distant jazz beat, but he remembered every detail. The Bureau was already inside the hospital, interviewing, listening, cross-referencing facial composites. They were quick, clinical. They knew time was blood. Back at headquarters, a break finally surfaced. Not from surveillance, not from DNA, but from an overlooked thread. A tenant the building manager hadn't mentioned earlier. An Asian man, lived alone, quiet. Recently, gone. Just like that. No goodbyes, no furniture left behind. Only an empty space too perfect to be natural. His name, according to the lease, Mark Terra. Fong and his team secured a warrant. FBI agents shadowed the entry as Boston PD prepared to breach. No mistakes this time. Boston Police, open up! Silence. Inside, the apartment was Spartan. Too clean, sterile. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged. Military or prison, one officer observed. Either way, someone who's used to leaving fast. In a small locked box tucked into the shadows of a closet, they found a handful of 9mm rounds, the same caliber as the murder weapon. Evidence bags were filled, photographs snapped, every item handled like it was a whisper from the past. Then Fong noticed something out of place. A ceiling tile shifted just slightly. Above it, nothing but dust, but the shape of absence was unmistakable. Whatever was here, he muttered, was important enough to hide. In the drawer of the kitchen table, they found a rental contract. Tara's previous address, San Francisco, California. And just like that, the investigation went coast to coast. The FBI made the call. Boston to San Francisco. Fast-track request. They needed everything on Mark Tara, now. What came back changed the game. The California address traced back to another name, Leon Perry. No known criminal record, but a wary voice over the phone. The kind of man who had something to lose. "This is Detective Fong with the Boston Police Department," Fong began. "We're conducting an investigation connected to a shooting involving 2 officers." "I don't know a Mark Tara," Perry claimed. His voice was stiff, guarded. Fong's instincts prickled. "You're sure? We found your number listed on his lease. I said I don't know him." But that tone, clipped, cornered, told Fong more than words. He wasn't just denying, he was lying. The FBI ran Perry's name deeper than Boston could, and what they uncovered? A revelation. Leon Perry had served time. Not just anywhere, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. And his cellmate? Ted Tsukiyama, known on the streets as Ted Suki, a seasoned outlaw, a fugitive with a trail of blood going back a decade. Mark Tara, Fong whispered, was never real. It was Suki all along, and now the Bureau had a name, a face, a record. But Suki? He was already gone. Now the face had a name. Ted Tsukiyama, alias Ted Suki, a man with a history carved out of shadows and sharpened by violence. Assaults on officers, a prison stretch, parole violations. Suki didn't just run from the law, he danced with it, always one step ahead. The Boston shooting wasn't a random act. It was the climax of a long, dangerous descent. And with Suki's true identity unmasked, the case crossed a line. The FBI officially took over. They deployed the full arsenal: behavioral analysts, fugitive task forces, digital forensics. This was no longer just about justice. It was a matter of national security. A cop killer with tactical precision and an interstate trail was now the Bureau's top priority. First stop, Leon Perry, the weak link, the man who claimed ignorance, but whose past whispered otherwise. Perry and Suki had shared more than a prison cell. They'd shared secrets, survival strategies, escape fantasies. The Bureau's Fugitive Apprehension Unit, partnered with Boston's detectives, flew west to San Francisco to confront him in person. He opened the door with the stiff posture of a man who knew he'd run out of lies. "I told you, I don't know him," Perry repeated, eyes darting like dice on a hot table. But then they showed him the old mugshot, a grainy photograph from inside Leavenworth. 2 inmates, side by side, Perry and Suki, together. The facade cracked. "You were cellmates," the agent said calmly, "and now Suki's on the run for killing a cop." Still, Perry stonewalled. "I haven't seen him in months." No confession, no cooperation. But no matter. The FBI had other tools: surveillance. For 2 days, agents watched him, every movement, every errand, every call. They trailed him through alleys, parking lots, and quiet back roads. And on the second night they saw it. Perry driving a vehicle registered not to him, but to Ted Suki. That was enough. They brought him in. Inside the interrogation room, the tone shifted. No more polite knocks, no more patient phone calls. This was federal now. The room hummed with quiet menace. "You're driving his car. He's a fugitive, and he killed a lawman. That makes you an accomplice." That word, accomplice, hit Perry like a punch. "I didn't help him escape," he blurted. But it was already too late for denials. The pressure was surgical. They knew he was holding back. And finally, under the weight of the truth, he broke. "He called me the day after the shooting," Perry confessed. "Said things went bad. Real bad." "Where from?" "Dayton, Ohio. He called from a payphone at the airport. Said he left the car and the gun there." That changed everything. The Bureau had been casting a net around Boston. Now they turned their eyes to the Midwest. Agents swept the Dayton airport. A vehicle was located, parked and abandoned. Inside, tucked beneath a floor mat, wrapped in a stained cloth like a relic of guilt, a 9mm Sig Sauer pistol, the same model used in the shooting. And then came the linchpin, a live round in the magazine bearing a clear fingerprint. Tsuki's. There it was. Not just hearsay, not just witness ID, physical evidence, direct, incontrovertible. Tsuki was the shooter. Perry, now staring down a federal indictment, surrendered what little leverage he had left. He admitted everything: Tsuki's call, the instructions to ditch the car and the weapon, and the chilling final task he'd failed to complete. "I was supposed to destroy the gun," he whispered. "But I didn't." Instead, he kept it, hidden in a shoebox at home, wrapped in guilt and cowardice. A search warrant was issued. The weapon was recovered. Ballistics confirmed it. This was the firearm that struck down Officers Torres and Surge. The Bureau's agents moved fast. The forensic team handled the weapon like an artifact, every detail cataloged, every print analyzed. And with that, Perry was charged, accessory after the fact. But more importantly, the FBI now had irrefutable proof tying Tsuki to the crime. Still, one truth burned brighter than the rest. Ted Tsuki was still out there. And now he knew the law was on his heels. But the Bureau wasn't chasing shadows anymore. They had a name, a face, a voice on a payphone in Ohio. And they were closing in. The name Ted Tsuki was now etched into the FBI's warboard in bold red ink, not just as a suspect, but as a symbol. On January 22, 1988, the Bureau placed him on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. That wasn't just a title. It was a siren blaring across every precinct in the nation, a declaration that Tsuki's crimes had earned him a spot among the country's most dangerous. Every agent, every field office, every pair of federal eyes was now watching. But Tsuki? He'd vanish like a ghost slipping between dimensions, until the Bureau changed the game. They went public. A national crime program, one of those late-night TV broadcasts watched by insomniacs, night shift workers, and folks with too many regrets and nothing else on, aired Tsuki's story, his face, his crimes, his name, all of it exposed to millions. And that's when the silence broke. The tip came in low and steady, like the hum of a wiretap. "I know someone connected to Tsuki," the caller said. The voice was calm, careful, but certain. He claimed Tsuki had family in Texas, kin who'd been in touch with him recently. That was a seismic shift. Up until now, Dayton, Ohio was the last known echo. But this tip hinted at something more: movement. The FBI acted fast. Phone records from Tsuki's Texas relatives were pulled, combed, dissected. Patterns emerged. And there it was, a trail of incoming calls from Mexico, not from the border, not from tourist towns, but from deep inside, Guadalajara. Now the hunt crossed borders. But Mexico wasn't just another jurisdiction, it was another world. The FBI couldn't act alone. They needed hands on the ground. That's where Special Agent Stephen Walker stepped in, the Bureau's legal attaché in Mexico, a man trained in diplomacy, detection, and the kind of quiet persistence needed for foreign soil. "In cases like this," Walker later said, "we don't just chase. We coordinate. We build trust. We follow rules others ignore. Mexican authorities joined the mission. Together, they began tracing the phone number, connecting digits to dirt, coordinates to concrete. But the Bureau didn't wait. They played a card no one saw coming. Leon Perry, still in custody, still terrified, but now willing to trade survival for cooperation. The plan was delicate. Perry would pretend he needed to flee the U.S., contact Suki's relatives in Texas, and ask for help getting across the border. If they reached out to Suki even once, it could give the FBI exactly what they needed. It worked. The family agreed to meet him in Matamoros, a dusty city just past the Texas border, a place where secrets pass in whispers and favors come with strings. The meeting was staged. FBI agents, Boston detectives, Mexican federal police, everyone was watching. Perry arrived alone, sat down with Suki's kin, wired and waiting. The conversation started slow, awkward, but Perry pushed. "I need to talk to him," he said, lowering his voice. "Where is he?" At first they danced around it. Then came the crack. "We can't tell you exactly," one relative admitted, "but he's in Guadalajara." That was it. Confirmation. Ted Suki was alive, and he was in Guadalajara. Mexican authorities moved fast. The phone number Suki had been using was traced to a residential complex in the city. For 2 days, federal agents watched. No action, no alarms, person's shadows and routine. Then, morning broke on February 6th, 1988. And there he was. Suki stepped out into the courtyard. He didn't know he was already surrounded. Mexican federal police closed in like storm clouds. Suki tried to run, one last time, but there was nowhere left to vanish. No alley, no disguise, no lifeline. He was taken down, alive, cuffed, and finally cornered by the justice he'd spent months trying to outrun. The FBI was waiting. Paperwork, clearance, diplomatic protocol. All of it handled with the precision only the Bureau could orchestrate. And just like that, Suki was back on U.S. soil, but this time in chains. The charges were swift and damning. Murder of a law enforcement officer, attempted murder, weapons violations, flight to avoid prosecution, and more still to come. But beneath those charges was something deeper. A question. Who was Suki really? And what else had he been planning? Because, as the Bureau would soon discover, the Boston shooting was only the beginning. Ted Suki was no longer a fugitive. He was a prisoner now, awaiting trial, locked down, under federal guard. But even in chains, his shadow lingered. The man hadn't just pulled a trigger in Boston. He had built something. And as the FBI peeled back the layers, they discovered that what happened that October night was merely an overture. It started with a simple question. What had Suki been preparing for before the shooting? In the days following his arrest, the Bureau conducted a second sweep of his abandoned Boston apartment. This time with a different lens, not just forensics, but counterterrorism. And that's when they found it. A box of electronics, wires, timers, circuit boards. At first glance, it was just junk, but the FBI's bomb technicians, the best in the country, saw something more sinister. Blueprints for destruction. Suki hadn't just been hiding out. He'd been building bombs. Homemade but intricate. Timed detonators, remote triggers, power sources disguised in household items. The Bureau didn't jump to conclusions. They followed the evidence. Each component was tested, simulated, reverse engineered. And the conclusion? These weren't props. They were real, and they were deadly. Then came the motive. Not vengeance, not chaos, but money. A new plan emerged, one more twisted and precise than anything Suki had pulled before. According to a confidential informant in Minnesota, A convicted bank robber with ties to Tsuki's crew, the fugitive had been orchestrating a crime that would have rewritten headlines. A bank heist, unlike any other. Step 1, kidnap a high-level bank manager. Step 2, cuff a briefcase bomb to their wrist, wired, armed, and visible. Step 3, force them to rob their own bank under the threat of detonation. Step 4, once the money was in hand, eliminate the witness. No evidence, no survivors. It was cruel, efficient, and chillingly close to execution. People fantasize about perfect crimes, one senior FBI agent remarked. Tsuki wasn't fantasizing. He was engineering. The Bureau needed proof. They retraced every location Tsuki had touched, every alias, every storage unit tied to his name. Eventually it paid off. In San Francisco, a small storage facility, rented under a fake ID, gave up its secrets. Inside, explosives, full builds, remote detonation rigs, blueprints. The FBI's bomb unit neutralized the devices under strict protocols. A controlled detonation confirmed their fears, functional, high yield, and designed for maximum civilian impact. This wasn't just robbery. This was domestic terrorism. The case exploded in scope. New charges stacked like bricks: conspiracy to commit robbery, use of explosive devices in a violent crime, attempted mass casualty planning. And once again, all roads circled back to Leon Perry. The FBI brought him in for another round of questioning, this time not as a tag-along to a murder, but as a possible co-conspirator in a bombing plot. He denied everything. "I didn't know what he was planning," he insisted. "If I had, I would have told you." But evidence doesn't lie. The bomb packaging, materials, tape. His fingerprints were there, right beside Tsuki's. His parole was revoked on the spot. He was rearrested, this time as an accomplice in a potential act of terrorism. With the walls closing in, Perry caved. Faced with 2 decades behind bars, he chose self-preservation over loyalty. He gave up everything. The routes Tsuki took after the Boston shooting, the places he stayed, the burner phones, the fake names, the stash houses, the caches of cash. And one more piece that made the Bureau's blood run cold. Tsuki had help, a network, people who believed in him, feared him, or simply owed him. Some were ex-cons, some active criminals. Others, just ghosts with clean records and dirty hands. But the question now wasn't whether justice would be served. It was how close the country had come to something far worse than a single act of violence, and how narrowly it had been stopped. By chance? No, by the Bureau. With Ted Tsuki behind bars, the final puzzle pieces began to slide into place. But for the Bureau, this wasn't about closure. It was about understanding how a man like Tsuki had managed to stay one step ahead for so long. Months on the run, no digital footprint, no credit cards, no paychecks. Yet somehow, he'd moved between cities, crossed borders, vanished in crowds. The answer came from the dark web of human connection, not technology, but loyalty. Old prison ties, underground contacts, a network of the forgotten, the angry, the criminally skilled. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was called in. They followed the money like bloodhounds chasing a scent no one else could detect. Cash withdrawals, burned phones, rental units under borrowed names. One name surfaced again, a former Leavenworth inmate. No recent convictions, but his financial records raised flags. Large, suspicious withdrawals that coincided with Tsuki's known movements. They brought him in. He resisted at first, but the evidence pressed down hard. Bank records, call logs, surveillance. The Bureau laid it all out like a dealer revealing a perfect hand. Eventually, he folded. "Tsuki called me after the shooting," he admitted. "Said he needed to disappear. I wired him the cash." From there, the map widened. A stash house in Houston was raided, a quiet building on the edge of industrial nowhere. Inside, $50,000 in cash, false identities, multiple weapons, and burner phones. And taped to the wall, like a general's war chart, a map of Mexico. Red ink circled Guadalajara, proof that Suki had planned everything. Escape wasn't luck, it was logistics. The Bureau responded with force. More than a dozen individuals were arrested. Some were charged with harboring a fugitive, others with criminal conspiracy. And one, a Texas-based arms dealer, was linked directly to the 9mm Sig Sauer used in Boston. He confessed, under pressure, to selling firearms to multiple wanted men, including Tsuki. But it wasn't just the weapons. It was the network, a web of ex-cons, gang affiliates, and silent facilitators. And every thread tied back to Tsuki. The man had engineered more than crimes. He had built an ecosystem of evasion. But now every branch of it was burning under the Bureau's relentless pursuit. As for the trial, it wasn't a trial. It was a reckoning. The evidence was so damning, the testimony so airtight, that the courtroom became a formality. Suki was found guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of a law enforcement officer. Attempted murder. Possession of illegal firearms. Conspiracy to commit armed robbery. Use of explosives in a violent crime. The sentence? Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 20 additional years for the bomb plot that never ignited, but nearly did. In the aftermath, ripples of change swept through law enforcement. Boston PD upgraded their equipment. Bulletproof vests became standard. Officers were issued high-capacity sidearms. Tactics were reevaluated. Protocols rewritten. Officer George Torres survived, barely. He returned to duty, then retired in 1997, carrying with him the scars of that October night. Roy Surge, the fallen officer, was honored posthumously, promoted to detective. A briefing room in the department now bears his name, a daily reminder that the badge doesn't make you invincible, only responsible. And the FBI? They saw the case for what it was, a warning. That threats don't always announce themselves with chaos. Sometimes they move in silence, build in shadows, and strike when no one expects. But the Bureau struck back, methodically, precisely, with coordination across states, agencies, and borders. From a backyard in Boston to an apartment in Guadalajara, they tracked the ghost, caught him, exposed his plans, and dismantled the world he thought he'd built in secret. Because the truth in the end was simple. Justice never forgets, and the FBI never stops.